Today we'll be talking about suicide prevention in the Latinx community. Our names are Natalie and Ramiro. We are counseling center paraprofessionals, and we're also members of the Suicide Prevention Outreach Team. This means that we have done extensive research on this topic and are trained to present this to you today. We've also done a lot of outreach at the counseling center, and we feel that we have some really valuable information to share with you all. However, we're not experts or mental health clinicians, but we will be reviewing some additional mental health resources and services on campus. The goals of this workshop include some objectives, which are what you're going to accomplish. We hope that today you'll reflect on your personal and cultural ties to suicide, and you'll also learn how to communicate about suicide with others. Our outcomes are what we want you to walk away with. Hopefully, when you log off today, you'll be better able to recognize signs of distress in yourself and others. You'll be able to refer others to services. And finally, you'll be able to spread accurate information within the Latinx community about mental health and suicide.
Una reacción anormal a una situación anormal es un comportamiento normal. An abnormal reaction to an abnormal situation is a normal reaction. This quote was said by Austrian neurologist, psychiatrist, philosopher, author, and Holocaust survivor Viktor Frankl. The quote by Viktor Frankl touches a bit of what we're going to be discussing today in terms of stress and how we define it. So let's start off by defining those terms. Stress is a state of mental or emotional strain or tension resulting from adverse or very demanding circumstances. Stress or de-stress typically manifests in two ways, emotional or physical. Emotional may include mood swings, irritability, anxiety, and depression. Some of the physical characteristics of stress may include fatigue, increased heart rate, increased weight fluctuations, and high blood pressure. Now, I do want to bring a disclaimer. As stated in the beginning, we are not trained medical professionals, nor are we mental health professionals. So if this sounds like you and you're concerned, reach out to a medical or mental health provider so that they can help you address these concerns with you.
Now we're going to review some signs of suicide and suicidal behavior. Hopefully in the future you'll be able to think back to this slide and you might be better able to recognize these signs in yourself and others. Before we jump into it, it's important to note that signs of suicidal behavior will look different in everyone, so it's not a one-size-fits-all situation. To start off, though, one sign is expressing feelings of hopelessness and feeling trapped or alone. Another is avoiding social interaction, so people may start to kind of withdraw from their friends and family. Also, expressing rage or revenge seeking, mood swings, giving away personal possessions, so people may start to give away very sentimental things, very personal, things that mean a lot to them. And finally, engaging in reckless behavior. So this can look like excessive alcohol or drug consumption. But again, it's really important to remember that this is not going to look the same in everyone, so be on the lookout for any combination of these signs.
So far, we have looked over the signs of stress and de-stress, the signs of suicide and suicidal behavior. Now we'll be looking at the intersect of the same topics in the Latinx, Chicanx community. Some of the unique stressors our community may face are broad, but may overlap and intersect at times. One stressor we may face is referred to acculturation stress. This refers to the mental and emotional challenges of adapting to a new culture. An example of this would be when migrants try to adapt to American values, standards, and etiquettes, but finding it difficult as a result of conflicting values or cultural practices. Another stressor we may face as a community are bicultural or biracial identities. As the saying goes, ni de aquí ni de allá. Some of us hold racial identities that may seem conflicting. We may also hold two dichotomous set of values that contradict one another. An example of this is coming from a collectivist or familia-based culture where our families are an extension of our identities. We may be tasked to deliver and help uphold our family. and their duties, and sometimes even errands. Additionally, we may hold individualistic values. A perfect example of this is following our career and academic aspirations. Another big example of a stressor we may face is microaggressions and racism. They intersect a lot with mental health issues. The minority stress model, offered by researcher Meyer in 2003, coined this model that explains the unique and hostile stressors marginalized groups face as a result of their identity. As a result, this stress damages their overall health. Finally, migration is a topic that is not discussed about when referring to stressors in our community. When you're forced to leave your native country, your family, your customs, your identity in exchange for survival and better life, it can be traumatic. Additionally, the violence that typically occurs during the migration is also not discussed about. Clearly, there are a lot of factors that may contribute to the high levels of stress in our community may face. The first towards better mental health is identifying these stressors.
We chose to include these statistics because we really want to highlight the role that intersectionality plays in suicide. Intersectionality is basically the combination of different identity groups. So, an identity is anything like your age, race, gender, sexuality, ability status, things like that. And when you belong to multiple marginalized groups, the combination of those multiple identities is going to create more challenges and more discrimination and just more struggles in life that you will have to face. And this can be very difficult to bear on your shoulders. I mean, it can be a lot on somebody's mental health. And it can ultimately lead to feelings of hopelessness and, suicidal ideation. So the first chart shows that Latinx LGBTQ youth were 30% more likely to report a suicide attempt in the past year compared to non-Latinx LGBTQ youth. So this highlights how intersectionality works, because both groups are belonging to a marginalized group, and that is their sexuality, so LGBTQ. However, the non-Latinx group, so these people are most likely white, this group is less likely to attempt suicide, and this could be due to various cultural things. It could be because they're receiving more access to mental health services. Maybe there's less stigma about going to therapy in their community, but also they're most likely facing less stressors in life that would lead them to attempt suicide. The first chart also shows us that we cannot be selective in our allyship. So you can't truly say, I really want to be there for my friends who belong to the Latinx community. I want to support them in their mental health. You can't say that if you don't mean it for all Latinx members, and that includes members of the LGBTQ identity. So the second table shows us various suicidal ideation among students in grades 9 through 12. This is from 2017. So Latina teens currently have the highest rate of suicide attempts among all adolescent groups in the U.S., according to the CDC. 15% of Latina adolescents in the U.S. have attempted suicide. That's compared to 9.8% and 10.2% for white and black female teens, respectively. This means that nearly 26% of Latina teens have considered suicide. So the intersectionality we're looking at here is gender and race. So we see that women have higher rates of suicidal ideation than men in this group. So that's the gender piece, because women are going to face more struggles in life in America than men. And then you add in the Hispanic piece. So now women who identify as Hispanic are doubly marginalized, and they're going to face double the life I mean, it's not numerical, so I don't want to say double the life stressors, but they're most likely going to face more stressors in life, more obstacles, more discrimination because of their intersecting identities. And it's just really important that you consider what other people are going through, and consider how, you may be different from someone else, and so therefore you cannot truly know how they feel. You cannot truly know how someone of a different race, someone of a different age, gender, sexuality, ability status, you can't know exactly what they're facing in life, but you can be there as an ally and practice allyship, and you can be there to support them. We just really want you to know that if you experience any of these thoughts or feelings of suicide behavior or suicidal ideation, you are not alone.
It is important to discuss language when referencing suicide. Suicide, as many of you may know, carries a strong negative taboo in our society. We are told we shouldn't speak about it as it may increase the risk of dying by suicide. However, in order to increase vulnerability and address the concern of suicide, we should begin by expanding our vocabulary to properly address suicide. For example, we would want to avoid terms such as committed suicide and instead replace it by died by suicide. Another example with this is instead of saying complete suicide or successful suicide, we can use a term such as ended his/her their life, took his/her their own life, or suicided. Finally, we can also say attempt to end his/her their life instead of saying unsuccessful suicide. At the end of the day, we want more people to feel less judged and more comfortable when they are speaking about their suicidal thoughts or behaviors. By changing our language, thus our tone, we can help create a non-judgmental environment, thus increasing the chances of survival and prevent anyone else from dying by suicide.
Now that Ramiro has introduced the language to use when discussing suicide, let's talk about how to start these conversations, because they can be really difficult. Sometimes we don't know what to say or how to be there for our friends, but the number one way to prevent suicide is to talk about it. The most important thing is to use non-judgmental, clear, and direct communication. Our friends don't necessarily want us to solve their problems. Sometimes it seems like the best way to support them is to offer solutions. This can make it seem like you're not really listening to them. A good way to handle this is to say something like, "Hey, I saw you posted this on Snapchat. I just wanted to check in." Ask how you can support them, but don't force them into anything, because this will make your friend become defensive. Inform them about counseling center services, which we'll talk more about later, and then most importantly, follow up afterwards. Check in on them, but remember to be aware of healthy boundaries, because at the end of the day, you're not their therapist. A specific conversation skill that is really important when discussing suicide is empathy. Forming an emotional connection with someone by saying, "I'm so glad that you told me," does much more to help a friend than trying to solve their problem, because this lets them know that we are there to support them and listen. You also want to avoid saying "at least." For example, "At least work isn't too busy right now." This is our way of trying to solve their problem, make it hurt less, and take away their pain. But on the receiving end, it seems like you're just delegitimizing how someone feels. In addition to empathy, validation is super important. It helps our friends know that what they are feeling is not dumb or unjustified. You might say, "Yeah, that sounds really frustrating. I can imagine that I would be really upset if that happened to me." Reflection shows others that we're paying attention. When they say, "I feel hopeless because I'm drowning in homework," you'd follow it up by saying, "Yeah, you're feeling hopeless." This might sound dumb or make it seem like you're not really listening, but it does so much more than saying stuff like, "At least you don't have an exam this week." Finally, clarification is useful when we want to gain more information about the situation. We might say, "This is what I'm hearing you say. Is that right?" This shows them that we're intently listening. Using these conversation skills will help the environment feel warm and open. It's also less likely that someone would become defensive since you're being genuine. Try to remember to use some of these skills to support those in your life, but remember at the end of the day, you are not their mental health clinician. Let's recap what we've talked about today. We first reviewed signs of suicide and suicidal behavior, such as giving away personal possessions and avoiding social interaction. Remember that suicidal behavior will present itself differently in each individual. Then we talked about various cultural stressors which can lead to suicidal behavior, such as migration and acculturation stress. The Latinx community faces many stressors in America, so it's really important to recognize how they can negatively impact your mental health. We also talked about how to use destigmatizing language, both in English and in Spanish. We want to avoid using words that associate suicide with criminal behavior. For example, instead of saying someone committed suicide, say someone died by suicide. Then we discussed conversation skills and how to support others who are in distress. The most important thing to remember here is that our friends do not want us to solve their problems. They simply want someone to support and love them. Talking about suicide may not seem like it does much, but it's actually the number one way to prevent suicide. You can make a huge difference in the Latinx community and help others receive the help they need by talking about suicide. Cognito at-risk training is a great resource that's free for all U of I students and staff. It walks you through modules where you get to respond to difficult situations that your friends are in. I like to describe it as kind of a Sims version of discussing mental health and discussing suicide. So it's just really helpful for learning how to recognize signs of distress and how to make referrals. You can find it on the Counseling Center website. The Counseling Center is still offering services online. We use a secure form of Zoom that is HIPAA compliant. You can call the Counseling Center at this number to set up an appointment with a counselor. We have a same-day policy, which means that you will talk to a therapist the same day you call us for your initial appointment. For the best shot at getting an appointment, call at 7:50 a.m. when our phone line's open. But this semester, we've had students call as late as noon and still get appointments for that day. We also offer many outreach services such as workshops like this and group therapy. Here's all of our social media. You should follow these to stay updated on Counseling Center services and events.
This concludes our presentation on suicide prevention in the Latinx, Chicanx community. We thank you so much for taking the time to review our information on suicide prevention.